There we go. Now we're live. All
All
right.
right.
Cheers. Well done. How's it going? So,
Good. Feeling good.
uh, Josh, well, hold on. You and I think we first met back in 2016. I went and spoke at a camp
Yeah.
that you were at, and then we met up for a number of times. But then, through the midst of you bouncing around the US and different places
hmm
and everything, it's been some good conversations along the way. So, cheers to that. That's
hmm
awesome. But now you are out in the West. You're in
hmm
Washington, right?
Yeah, I'm in Seattle, Washington. Moved here in December, so I've been here for a few months. And I'm at the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. So I'm towards the end, just finished my second term of grad school,
Dude.
uh, the Masters of Counseling and Psychology. So we're doing it. We're doing the thing.
So it's actually called a wait, it's a school of theology and psychology?
Yeah, so it used to be called. It was started by Dan Allender. I
Okay.
didn't know the school existed or Dan Allender existed until like last year. But originally it was called like Mars Hill Theological Seminary or
Oh,
something like
okay.
that. But had no connection to the Mark Driscoll Church, and that was one of their reasons for changing the name. Because right around the time they started was when the Mars Hill Church started here, and
Okay.
so I don't know how long ago they changed it to the Seattle School. Of theology and psychology. So yeah,
Understandable.
their primary frameworks that they work from are psychological, theological, and biblical studies.
So my undergrad was in biblical studies, but I think in like my second master's was in theology, but I want to say actually half of it was psychology anyways.
Mm,
The idea of theology and psychology working together is like endlessly fascinating to me. And I can't believe that more pastors aren't trained in how those two things interact. So,
oh yeah, like I one of my best friends. I'm about to meet with him after this. He's in the MDiv program. He's like the only guy in his cohort in the MDiv program. It's a
okay.
very small program, but um, he's going to be such an whether he becomes a pastor or whatever he goes on to do. Like he he's getting to learn so much like therapeutic type stuff and like psychological stuff through his program there, which is super cool.
So, maybe we could start with that. What drew you to that school then?
Well, I was starting to look at I kind of decided and realized I wanted to pursue counseling, and so I was starting to look at grad schools. Wasn't like super thrilled with the idea of going back to school after having not been in school for 5 years.
Right.
And so I say I was looking like I looked at a handful of schools and not in any serious way, and then randomly stumbled upon this school via a podcast. And it was just one of those things where I went on their website, started reading their stuff. They have an amazing website, first of all, but I started just reading about what they were about. And I think the thing that stood out to me the most was I could tell that because I wasn't planning on going to a Christian school, I was planning on going to a secular school. And so to
For counseling.
end up for counseling, and so to
Okay.
end up on a Christian school site and reading it, they just talked about it. Just seemed like a place where they handled questions really, really well,
Hmm.
um, and that felt like a place that I wanted to be at. And I think I recognized like a lot of my own questions that I still am still have and I'm still very much so processing. And I recognized that get I wouldn't get the processing of those and the answering to those, or or just the searching through those at a secular program.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I would say I also recognized um, I think I recognized that if I went to a secular program that didn't include any level of spirituality, that felt lacking.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That felt like missing something. So yeah, it hit a few different things that and it just felt like it was just one of those like bodily senses of it felt
Yeah.
pretty right for as soon as I started reading about it. I felt very like at home and excited about it.
Yeah.
And then just kept taking steps forward, and I've been really happy with my decision. So it's been sweet.
Man. But the idea that spirituality and psychology could work together is pretty
Mm-hmm.
wild. I I think it's actually the Greek word for soul is word for it's the word psyche.
Mm-hmm.
So psychology is soulology.
Mm-hmm.
And so why wouldn't soulology and spirituality want to work together? But it's
Mm-hmm.
funny because I feel like these two areas like church life and then therapeutic counseling, whatever, it's like they're both in a turf war sometimes for which
Mm-hmm.
one really changes people's lives. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
just stop that dualistic argument and realize that they can
Mm-hmm.
work together in a really powerful way if you let them. It doesn't have to be either
Yeah.
or, right?
Yeah, and it's super interesting. Like, I feel very new in this field because my undergrad was not in psychology or anything. So I'm still feel like, I'm just starting to step into this and starting to like learn, and I'm learning a lot. But it feels like in what I've been reading and learning over the past year is it seems like this field, and even like it stretches into like the medical field, is starting to see the benefit and the
Mm-hmm.
just kind of the reality of it's almost this like there's something else going on beyond like
Mm-hmm.
this science that we've how we've come up with everything over the past 100 years or so.
Right.
um and like for example I did a we had to research indigenous healing practices alongside of a um like a psychotherapy theory last term, and super interesting. I researched ayahuasca, which is yeah,
Oh,
that's a
okay.
that's a whole other thing, but super, yeah, just super interesting, and just learning how like how these ancient indigenous practices, all sorts of different ones, how they're being used today and how they are having like actually a lot of benefit today, and how there's actually maybe sometimes even more truth or benefit in these ancient practices than like modern medicine.
Yeah. It's really arrogant to think that previous generations didn't know something,
Yeah.
right? It's really, really arrogant.
Well, and they just had a whole different way of, looking at things. Um,
Right.
yeah.
Now, before this, though, you were out in Montana. I remember
Hmm.
actually having a text conversation back and forth with you because you're like, "Oh man, I'm going to be outside in my tent and a
Oh,
hailstorm is
yeah.
coming." I'm like, get inside. Like, you do not want to be in a tent when hail is coming. Even your car can be dangerous. Like, get under a
Yeah.
bridge overpass. And
Yeah. That
you
was funny.
survived, but
Yeah. I was in my tent and I just like, I had been traveling across country, and at this point I was in South Dakota in the Black Hills. And so I'm getting there at sunset. I like
yeah.
just get my tent set up as the sun goes down. And then hear this thunder like rolling over, and like I start looking up stuff on my phone, and I realize, oh, there is a big thunderstorm with ping pong ball sized hail. Um, I'm like, maybe I'll
Ping
be okay. I don't
pong.
know. So of course I text you, and and you're like, yeah, you need to get out of there. So I threw everything in my car, and somehow I was like running away from the storm, and
Oh,
somehow found an Airbnb.
yeah. I'm glad you lived. I've had
Yeah,
cracked windshields and cracked radiators as a result of hailstorms. So,
yeah.
anyways, but you're on your way out to a place in Montana, and that's really what I want to ask you about.
Mhm.
Is it you went out and for about, was it a year and a half?
Yeah, I think like if you total up the actual months I was there, it was like 13 or 14 months.
Okay.
But about a year and a half span of time.
And it was an organization specifically built around the idea of helping pastors or just anyone who's going
Yeah,
through
so
burnout.
it kind of started the idea of it started in like the early 2000s with just basically just like a group of pastors that just started spending time together like regularly, like once or twice a year, and doing these like cool fishing trips in Yellowstone and on the Bighorn. And they would like do it up, like they would get a chef, and um they just found so much meaning out of it, and so much yeah, just they got so much out of it that they started over the years to realize, wait, this could be something bigger. So then what it, is now and what it's kind of evolved into is um, it's primarily pastors. I actually, ironically enough, was just with the executive director Monday. He actually lives down in Eugene, and I was just visiting him. But he was telling me that it's like 70% or so of the guests that come out are pastors, and the
Okay.
rest I would say are like we'd get a good handful of like young life people. There's a lot of nonprofit leaders,
Hmm.
um, and then like businessmen, and then just like random people. Majority of them are all coming from like some form of kind of Christian something. Um, that doesn't necessarily mean like they all worked vocationally in like a
Okay.
Christian field, but
Okay.
because we and it was all over the map because we had people that were like from Hollywood, but then we would have people from Nashville and people from out here like from Seattle, and people from all kind of areas of faith and whatnot within the
So
Christian
you
context.
would you would help them go out fly fishing during the day, and then the
Hmm.
end of the night, you would sometimes send pictures. I mean, Montana looks absolutely gorgeous, even in the middle
Hmm.
of the bleak winter, right? But you'd sometimes send some pictures of these bonfire conversations that you would have with these retreatants that would come to where you are. And there were a few times you said that you were having these really amazing conversations. I remember you tried to put me in contact with this other guy who's like kind of
Hmm.
from the East Coast. We never really connected, but what were some of the content of those conversations when you talk with people at the end of the day and they're talking
Hmm.
about the burnout that they experience from working at nonprofits or ministries? What was that like for you to hear people
Yeah.
share that stuff?
Well, what's interesting is so I kind of have like I have some ideas of like those like kind of deeper, heavier conversations. But what's interesting, I was just thinking of is like honestly, majority of the conversations were about the most random things. Um, because the way that it was set up, it was like there was no structure, there was no program. It was literally the design was to like what you would do with your best friend. You like that's just what we're gonna do with people,
Oh,
and
nice.
like the only thing that people had to do, the only thing they had to kind of be there for was dinner at this time around the table. If they wanted to stay in the room the rest of the day, they could do that. And the only thing they like were in a sense required to be at was dinner at 7 p.m.
Okay.
And it's around the table. So like the interesting thing is you just kind of I think there was a sense of pastors and these leaders in a way that they don't ever get to do, kind
Hmm.
of kicking off their shoes a little bit and kind of leaning back and kind of and um,
Yeah.
letting down any barriers. And so you all of a sudden just get it just feels like you're sitting with a friend and you're
Hmm.
just and usually you're meeting a ton of people, so usually they're like, oh, how'd you end up out here in Montana, and you're kind of doing
Right.
all that the small talk thing, and getting to know each other a little bit, and then usually those more deeper conversations would happen actually at the table. So they
Is that
would
right?
do this
Over food?
over food. Yeah, so that was like the main thing in terms of if you want to even call it program, but basically there was this long table, and so trips consisted usually of like 15 to 18 guys, and they'd all get around this one big table, have an amazing meal, and there would be not like a sermon or not like a lesson, but usually just like a question or like a couple
Hmm.
questions. And they would just go around and kind of all share. And I got to sit in on not as many as I would have liked, but I got to sit on in on a lot of those. And I was just like a fly on the wall, getting to hear these guys, talk about the things that they were had been going through or were currently going through, or the things that they were getting a brief pause from,
Oh, yeah.
in the 5 days they were in Montana. And yeah, and so I would say like those were more so the times that I like those kind of like pointed um, like heavier stories of like what was the deeper stuff going on,
Wow.
behind,
Yeah.
in their lives, would come out for sure.
Well, I would imagine the fact that they had to fly to Montana, often
Hmm.
cross state lines, gave them the ability to drop a number of walls, right? Because if they were even within the same town, they might run into
Hmm.
someone. And we all know that when you work in some of these high profile giver professions, you feel like you always have to be ready to give and never really able to
Hmm.
receive. So I would bet even having to travel to have a week long quote Sabbath was really helpful for people, right? But then
Yeah.
would you say that what were some of the more interesting conversations then that you remember from the dinner conversations?
Yeah. Well, some of the so I think one of the most interesting things was kind of like you're saying, they'd have fly there. Sometimes people, didn't even really know how they got there. They're like, I don't know what this is or where I am. This person invited me, and I said yes.
Yeah.
They told me I wouldn't regret it. And yeah, we were in the middle of nowhere. Like, there's like basically no cell phone reception.
Yeah.
We would also we wouldn't take their friends away, but we would request like, hey, like don't be checking work email, don't be on your phone. And there was
Right.
also like no real superset structure, so they were kind of always there's this thing of like, well, what's at 9 p.m. and then what's at this time and what's at, and it's like,
Oh,
no, like,
interesting.
we're just chilling, like we're just hanging out. And so I think like one of the things that I realized that was I was like, oh, that's really interesting, was a lot of these, if not most of these, people coming out, uh, they're like, "This is the first time I've done anything like this in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years." And
15
not
years without
yeah.
taking a 5-day break.
Yes, yeah, like, not only taking, like, a 5-day break, in that capacity of, like, leaving your family and leaving, like, work, but even just, like, the conversations they were having, that I would say this is what was even more interesting, is I remember people saying, like, "Man, I can't remember when the last time is I've, like, gotten to have conversations like this." And in my mind, I'm like,
Wow.
"Wait, I feel like I'm having these conversations all the time." Like, yes, I work here, but even before I worked here, like, I thought that's what happened, like, it was supposed to happen within, churches and, like, Christian context, and, like, and so it blew my mind that these leaders and pastors, um, weren't having, like, these times where, and that was the point of that place, but, like, it blew my mind that they weren't having these in depth, like just real, honest, like
Hmm.
non-judgmental, like, hey, this is the real me and this is the real you, and we're not trying to compare, ministries or churches. It's like
Right.
this is just like real connection.
I guess because a lot of people who are in ministry, they're trying to moderate those types of conversations or host them. And so they never really get to actually participate. I
Mm,
I know of some pastors that say it's like, yeah, I'm a part of a small group at my church, but I don't lead it. And to me, I think that doesn't that doesn't count because they
mhm,
still know you primarily through that title. They say that they'll let you drop the title and just be who you are, but the reality is that's always in there, right? So I like the idea of actually going to a completely different context, different state, and doing that. Did you um did you ever notice a connecting thread or theme through a lot of these people that were experiencing burnout?
um I would say that it was interesting. It's interesting because me coming in the the year and a half I worked there, like, you had people who have been coming for years, and so interesting hearing their stories,
Mhm.
and then people who maybe this was their first time, and so you had people who, like, maybe they're like, wow, like, this is where I was a year ago, or this is where I was 2 years ago, and, like, they would maybe even be in the room with people that were with them in that same room 2 years prior, and like kind of get
Right.
to tell of the growth and the change and like the healing that had taken place in those years. But then you also had people who were like they needed to be there, and like their life had just fallen apart like 2 days before or like the week before.
Wow.
Yeah, and like I wouldn't say that that was like all the time, but I would say fairly regularly, like there would be one or two, like usually it was like one person on a trip who got like added in, or
Mhm.
got invited in because it was like there's kind of this giant network, and so
Was
it's
it
all
because they
invitation.
were in crisis mode? There was certain people that showed up in full crisis mode.
Yeah, so like it works very like invitationally, and so like it's actually kind of a hard place to get to because you can't just sign up for a retreat. You have to be like invited, and so but because of that, like everyone there um, that comes is like pretty well known and pretty connected because they've come on trips before, and so like if there was someone who was like, hey, I have this friend, this is happening in his life, like can we get him out, we'd do like everything we could to get them out
Wow.
there. So yeah, I definitely had people in my boat that like and usually those stories, like I wasn't, it wasn't my position to try to like get into their what was going on in their life necessarily, but I would either hear a little bit at the dinner table or maybe in conversation with them, a little bit about what was going on in their life. And yeah, I mean you had people who like there's people who their own like ministries or organizations had like tried to kick them out or like stab them in the back in some way, and you had people who like their marriage was falling apart, or their ministry was falling apart, or like their faith was falling apart, um, and so I wouldn't say that that was like the majority of people necessarily. Maybe maybe over the span of years, if everyone had been at that point, more or less to an extent, but yeah, I mean, I think that was definitely one of the things I took away from that, is like, man, everyone has these points in life of like profound struggle, and there's times where things are, yeah, where people are just at their wits end because everything's upside down, um and thank God they were able to, not that them coming up for 5 days like does a ton necessarily, but
Right.
um that they got to get away and get kind of plugged in there for a little while, and whatever way that was able to help them.
Have it's to me it's that idea of the true self and the false self.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm a massive fan of Thomas Merton, but the idea that all of us cultivate a false self, a false version of ourselves that we think other people will buy into the most because we think that's the version that the other person will love.
Mhm.
And so then we build up a false self rather than being our true self. And I really think that churches are almost uniquely specialized at kind of making people want to have a false self,
Mhm.
because we all want to present ourselves in a particular way. We want to be the pastor that does everything. We want to be the person that has a successful thing, da 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 da. But then after 5, 10, 15 years, like you said, there's a fallout of living from that false self and never actually being your true self. And maybe that's part of what you experience is these dinner conversations of people actually being their true self for the
Mhm.
first time in 15 years. And like, my God, right? Because we all know it's possible to be in dysfunctional work environments, but at what point does dysfunctional like tip over into actually being toxic full
Mhm.
scale to us, and yet we're
Mhm.
blind to it, you know? That would be one of the questions I would like to ask somebody, or like I'd maybe just have a conversation with someone. How do you know when your life has switched from being just like moderately
Mhm.
dysfunctional to now it's just toxic?
Mhm.
Because my goodness, the ministry machine chews people out
Mm-hmm.
If you come into it with this idea that I need to be everything and do everything and answer everything, and man.
Yeah, and I think that I think the bigger part of it is exactly what you're saying, is that true self or false self, and that was definitely a sense that I got, was like this, I mean, and that was what we were trying to accomplish. It was like, yeah, this is the first time in however many years that people are truly getting to kind of cut loose a little bit and just be themselves and relax. But
Right.
another big part of it too was, like, with burnout is uh, the you're never stop, like, you always have to achieve, you always have to do more, you always have to have, like, more, grow your church more, raise more money or whatever. And like my the founder, my boss, like, he talked a lot about this because he experienced it himself. And so
Oh,
he was actually a big, like, he talked a lot about, kind of getting, like, hormonal testing and stuff, and seeing what, like, was physiologically going on in your body. Because there's
wow.
actually, and I think this extends beyond, like, ministry people, to like people that are in those high up, like, high caliber positions.
Mhm.
But just adrenal, like your adrenal levels are so low, like your adrenal gland has just been maxed out because it's been for years functioning on, like, complete 100%, 110%, just pumping,
Wow.
pumping, pumping. And so, yeah, I mean,
Wait, hold on. The adrenal gland has been over functioning for years. Is that
yeah.
what you said? And so then
Hmm.
its output is diminished? What
It,
happens?
it, it, yeah. And I mean, I don't know, like, a ton in detail, but, like, basically it's like tired out. It's like, it can't put out what it needs to be putting out. And what my boss, Brian, like, what he talked about for his own personal experience was like, uh, it it felt like he was spinning his tires, kind of
Mhm.
like, he's like, okay, I used to be moving, like, if I was on a bike and pedaling this hard, I used to be, like, able to move at this speed pedaling
Mhm.
this hard, but now I'm pedaling the same speed, if not harder, and getting, like, a quarter of the distance. Um,
Okay.
yeah,
The
so
same effort does not produce the same output as it used to.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Like, you're because they're those types of people are used to functioning, like, so high and so, like, go go go, and so, like, accomplish things, get things done, that, like, all of a sudden, when, like, their body eventually can't do it anymore. um,
Wow.
and then they're like, what's going on? Like, I used to be able to do all these things, and now all of a sudden, like, I'm trying just as hard, putting just as much effort, if not more effort, but I can't do what I
And then
used to
does
do.
that increase? Like then the people try to double their input to try to have the same,
Exactly, yeah.
and
and
then
then
it's
and
just a
then
treadmill of ever increasing overwork and over functioning.
Yeah, and I think that's a big piece that, like, leads to burnout. I'm sure, like, there's probably different ways you could define burnout, or different,
Hmm.
yeah, different causes or different types. But yeah, I would think that, like, especially when you have that combination of, like, one thing in preparing for this, I wrote down, was like, I think pastors are some of the most, like, lonely, isolated people.
Absolutely.
um,
Absolutely.
and And so you have that, and you have this, like, the truth and the false self that we were talking about, and then mixed with, like, having to do max performance, and, like, having to always, like,
Oh.
go go go, and
Mhm.
yeah, and, like, carrying the weight of an organization or a church, or all of those things. And it's even worse than, like, a business, I would think, because a business is a business. You're not trying to, like, care for people exactly. Um,
Right.
and
Which there's
so,
always
and
people to care for. So
yeah,
there's no field goal. There's no end zone. There's
yeah,
always more people to care about. Wow.
yeah. So that's, I mean, when you start thinking about all those things, it's like, yeah, one of the things I walked away with is, like, I don't ever want to be a pastor, because that sounds really, really hard.
Oh yeah. So then would you say your experience out there shifted the way you think about anything? Like, okay, so one
Hmm.
of the questions I asked you ahead of time was what questions did that place working there lead you to have? Sure.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like, in what ways did your experience of hearing people with burnout change how you experience or view the world?
Mm-hmm. I think that let me take a look at my notes here and see if what I had written down from
Yeah.
um well, kind of what I was saying earlier, was that like how everyone struggles and everyone, at
Mm.
some point goes through those things. um I would for sure say it like didn't make, I already have worked in a church, and it definitely did not make going back to working in a church seem any more attractive.
Mm.
um yeah, I think it emphasized the need for community and the need for like relationship, and the need for like vulnerability within those relationships,
Right.
and just the like lack that there is, especially
Yeah.
uh
Yeah.
for people in leadership. um I think for me, with that, when I think of that, or when I think of like, leadership, then it's like that doesn't make me want to, whether it's pastor or another, doesn't make me want to like step into a leadership role, because you realize,
Yeah.
the difficulties of. But then that's a question of like, why is that? Like that was one of the things actually I had written down, was like, why um why do we feel like we need to have it all together? Like
Mm.
why do, yes, I recognize uh, the position that like pastors are in, and the position that leaders are in, and like I guess you would hope they're further along, whatever that means.
That they're a little
But
bit more
like,
perfect than you are.
yeah, I mean, that's like, even as I'm saying it, it's like it's
Yeah.
already like built into like how I think, is like there's this sense of like, oh, this person is the pastor, so they have it all together, or they should have it all together.
Yeah.
And if they don't have it all together, then they shouldn't. Then what are they doing there? And so then that's why you have all these issues, is because it's like there's no room for the pastor, or the, whatever ministry leader um, to struggle, or to have questions, or to like therefore be really genuine in any way.
Right.
And
But
granted, I will say, like, I did hear stories of like pastors that got to a point where they're like, I can't do this anymore, and so they like stood up in front of their church and like were honest, and like
wow.
sometimes that was met with like, okay, well then like you're out, and other times that was met with like actually like a really like embrace. I think actually Rob Bell's story, which Rob Bell's not someone who came out there, but knowing
Right.
from his book, I think that was like his experience, wasn't it? It was where he kind of shared to the church where he was at, and like
Mm.
they kind of embraced him and helped him along like
Yeah.
his journey and all of that.
Well, and there's a difference. Maybe you could probably say more about this because you're going to school for it now. That's cool. There's a difference between expecting your spiritual leaders to be perfect and have it all together versus
Mhm.
having them just be healthy,
Mhm.
right? Because I feel like perfection is a standard that's unachievable for everyone,
Mhm.
but being healthy is something different than being perfect and
Oh
being
yeah.
over functioning and overworking and all of that. But just being a healthy person, that alone is a really hard enough thing, let alone trying to
Mhm.
be perfect in front of everyone, you know?
Yeah, and I guess defining, yeah, like then the question is like, what does it mean to be healthy?
Hmm.
And also what, um yeah, and then I guess within like whatever is categorized as healthy, like what is the ebbs and flows of, that? Because I
Yeah.
think the nature of being human, the nature of like health is like that change. Like I often think of like winter, like trees. Like you look at a tree and its
Oh.
leaves are, its leaves are all gone
Uh-huh.
and it looks pretty dead, but it needs that. Like,
But
and
it's
the
not
spring
really
comes and
dead. Oh, I see what you
it's not,
mean.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
but it's not really dead. And it's still a healthy tree. Um, like that's still a perfectly fine, healthy tree. And once the weather warms up and like the seasons change, it'll bud and be, visibly flourishing. Um, but like maybe during winter, during fall into winter, like it's not outwardly doesn't outwardly seem healthy, and maybe like so I don't know, that might be an interesting like
Well, that's
metaphor
actually a
analogy
great
of.
analogy. What it makes me think of is we need to think in terms of larger seasons or rhythms. Cuz yeah, okay, in the Christian subculture, you're supposed to have a Sabbath every 7 days. But that's
Mhm.
still different from saying I'm going to actively have less productivity for 3 months of the year than I will in the
Mm,
other 9 months of the year.
mhm,
That's not something that's even done, or even the idea that, you know what, every 7 years I'm going to take a full year off.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
the idea of seasons or rhythms like that, of taking 3 months of, you know what, for my job as a pastor, I'm not going to lead Bible studies for 3 months. And instead, I'm just going to read books and enjoy life and actually let that. Because let's be honest, the reason why some sermons are really boring, right? You can tell me if this is right or wrong. Some sermons are really boring because the pastor's life is boring,
Oh, that's actually I've never thought that, but that
right?
sounds pretty
Like, oh
accurate.
my
Yeah.
God, like, no wonder your sermons are tragic. Your life is tragic. Like, you have no
Mhm,
adventure, no excitement, there's no growth or learning. And so, of course, your sermons have none of those things then.
mhm. Yeah, and I think
That might
this might
sound
be getting.
cynical. I apologize.
Well, and I was gonna say like this might be getting into a little bit of a different topic, but like I think then that brings up the question of like in talking about rhythms and all those things is like what why is it that the church needs to be a like hour to 2 hour show or performance or structured thing every single Sunday.
Mm.
um like my buddy who is about to he just started working at a new church around here, and he was telling me that I don't know how this is different or the same during COVID, but like um their church, I think he said they only have like what would be seen as like a service once a month, or something like that.
Wow.
And then they like every other Sunday they're doing something that's much more like in the community,
Hmm.
or much more like service oriented. And then I think even within that, if there's a fifth Sunday, like every 3 months, there's a fifth Sunday, they just don't meet
Right.
at all. And I know the church I attended like a handful of times when I could in Billings, Montana. They did that like every time there's a fifth Sunday, they didn't meet, and it was just like, hey, like be with your family, like just rest, just eat food
That's
and talk,
lovely.
like yeah.
That's kind of countercultural, even in the Christian subculture, you know?
Mm,
So, how about from your time in Montana,
hmm.
what would you say are some of the greater insights or pieces of wisdom you think you got from that season?
um well, a few of them are like kind of, I was saying to you before we started recording, like one of the biggest ones that was more of like a personal takeaway, was I kind of stepped into that season at where I was working, um, just very cynical and very, um, I hadn't been in any type of Christian church
Yeah.
context for like a year at that point. Um, and so I was wrestling with a lot of questions.
Mm.
And kind of actually when I got there, the first 2 weeks, I was like, did I make the right decision? Like this, I haven't been in a ministry Christian, setting. This feels very like uncomfortable to be here, and it's like bringing up a lot of things that I like have been not having to deal with for the past year, and I don't like this. Um, and what it taught me was how to exist, and not only exist, but like be in relationship and be in community with
Mm.
other people when you like don't necessarily agree with their beliefs or aren't sure where you are. And it actually taught me. It was the first time. Um, like it was the first time that I entered into a Christian community, and I made a the whole like every step of the process and going there. I made it a point to like each person I talked to kind of like get interviewed was like, hey, like really like what you guys do. It sounds really cool. I'd love to come out. Just so you know, I'm not sure if I'm a Christian. Like I'm not sure if I believe any of this. Is that okay? And like thankfully they were like, yeah, like we're all figuring it out. Like come on out. Um, and and so that was the first time I stepped into that a Christian context or community where like the first time there was like a Bible study, I was just like, hey, like this is me and this is where I'm at. Um, and that wasn't like it wasn't like that was a topic of discussion all the time. It would come up with people, but
Right.
I still had amazing friendships, and actually, I would say those friendships were way better because of that. And
Mm.
we were, people were able to ask me questions about like, oh, how are you? What are you thinking now about this or that? So yeah, really like learning how to not only be more real and vulnerable, which is like all the things that we're discussing, have been discussing, but um, how to. It's so hard nowadays. Like everything is so what's the word? Very like conflictual and like two. It has to be like one or the other. There's a word for that.
Oh,
I'm thinking
dualism.
right now.
Right.
Dualistic, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
dualistic.
but it's like, can we exist? Like, how do we do relationship, um, and community, and like even within like not agreeing with each other, or how what does that look like?
Right.
So I learned, and how do we be uncomfortable with like, it's not always comfortable to be in a relationship with someone if you're like, ooh, like I don't agree with what they just said.
Yeah.
So, and
Especially
I think,
especially if you're part of the Christian subculture in some ways, if that's actually the only differences you have are people that are like Methodist but not Presbyterian, that's not real difference. There's like
mhm.
some difference. But if you're a part of a Christian subculture, I'm not sure if it really prepares you to sit down and actually be able to have a full meal with someone who actually believes completely different than you
Mhm.
about the world. Yeah, so it sounds like you actually kind of grew in your ability to, was it like sit in the nuances of things? Is that
Yeah,
it?
to sit in the nuance and to like, I think there's a line between trying to figure out like, and this is more personal for like me trying to figure out like how I do this is like, okay, where do I voice my opinion or thought? We're having conversations and someone is saying things in a certain way that like assumes, I get this all
Right.
the time. Like there's the assumption that like I believe everything they believe, and so it's like where do I um say, hey, actually like I don't agree with that, or where do I just kind of, almost like nod in not necessarily agreement, but like nod in like I understand what you're saying and
Mm.
like tracking with you and like you're able to still like have those conversations and I think kind of I'm continuing to learn that now in my program here like um I mean we have such a wide like range of people in the program, all sorts of different like beliefs. um yeah, like learning how like learning what's going on inside you as you are hearing someone else talk or as you're interacting with them and paying attention to that and paying attention to like what's going on in the other person. And it's just yeah, it's not easy, but it's definitely like a learned thing that I'm very much so, like still learning to do. And I think it's very easy to, especially in today's world, to like immediately go to like, oh, I disagree, so either I need to like be angry about this or like make a post on social media or like fight back or
Yeah,
um
of course.
or just like go vent to someone about like how, which I've done all of these things probably in the past, but um yeah, can we exist in relationship and not agree. I think we can. It's just not easy.
So, what would you say? I'm trying to think of how to ask this question. For someone that didn't have the experience in Montana that you did, what would
Okay.
you hope everyone
Mm,
knew that you learned from your time there?
mm. That's a great. I like that. I like that question.
What is something that you wish
Um,
everyone would know and like incorporate as like a piece of life wisdom?
yeah, I would say like we're all figuring this out.
Okay.
Because like I would have like we would have the you know the pastor that like everyone looks up to or whatever, and they're figuring their life out and how to do Christianity or how to do ministry or how to do their job, um,
At their
how to
stage
do
of life. Yeah.
yeah, how to do their marriage, how to do being a father or mother. Like everyone is figuring it out, and so to put this kind of to have this idea
Does that
that
include no one has all the answers?
yeah. I mean, like I have all the answers and you have all the answers, John, because we're on this. We're talking here, and
Okay. That's right.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. Like no one has all the answers, and I think that that might even tie into what we were just talking about. Like, how do we exist in relationship
Yeah.
and disagree? Is like, well, neither of us have all the answers, and if we're able to agree on that, that neither of us have all the answers, then that's like maybe the first step.
That's pretty good.
Mm.
So then bringing it full circle, you're now in a program that's about theology and psychology.
Yeah.
Do you feel like your time in Montana was actually really good preparation for then talking
Oh
about how
yeah.
those two things interact?
Yeah. I mean, I would say being in Montana is what led me. I mean, not in and of itself, but like it was during my time in Montana that I realized I wanted to become a counselor. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so like there's a lot of other job experiences and life experiences that also have led me there. But yeah, being there and recognizing the need in within Christian circles, but within the world, like people need help and people need
Yeah.
people, um and yeah, just recognizing that within myself, that like spurred me on to pursue therapy in the way that I'm pursuing it. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think being out there in Montana, yeah, I guess it just gave me a unique insight into, because I wasn't doing, nor was really anyone doing like specifically therapeutic work there, in terms of like there wasn't like a licensed therapist on site or anything like that. Um, but yeah, just seeing like the reality of people's lives, even the people
Yeah.
who seemingly have it all together or seemingly have all the answers, um, and people go through really horrible, awful things, or just
Yeah.
really hard parts of life. So I think in that way it prepared me, and then for myself personally, yeah, like holding like the questions I have and being in an environment for over a year where like I probably, like on those big kind of theological or whatever religious, questions, like I'd probably have disagreed with, majority of the people that I was living and interacting with, yet I had amazing friendships and relationships. And so,
Yeah.
I can continue to do that with, the people I'm interacting with at school or the people I'm interacting with at work or in life, and still learning how to do that. But
I mean, let's be honest. Whether you're doing it officially in like a professional sense or whatever,
yeah.
let's be honest, there is, in my mindset, there is nothing more Christ like than just being a healer in
Mm,
whatever profession you find yourself, right?
hmm.
It has so little to do with being perfect like being Christ-like doesn't mean that you're perfect. Being Christ-like to me means that as best as you are able, you're trying to be a healer to the people around you. Right? And no matter how we go about that, like you said, a lot of people are going through terribly difficult times. And sometimes the people that are the healers have never allowed themselves to be healed by others. Right? And that's part of what your program was out in Montana. Like, these people are constantly healing others, and yet they've never actually allowed themselves to be vulnerable and let other people tend to their wounds. So my goodness. Well, I'll be honest, I enjoyed it. First off, I always enjoy our conversations. That's why sometimes we meet up at taverns or bars and we talk for like 3 or 4 hours, and that's not an exaggeration. But no, I appreciate it, man. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, I wish we were in a bar or tavern right now, but it's a little bit of distance between us.
Yeah. Well, maybe next time.
I'll drink one. I'll toast to you tonight and drink one and pretend I'm with you.
Okay, that sounds good, man. I think it's time to sign off. Thank you for your time, man.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me end this. There we go. Thanks, you.